When I walked into that courtroom, everyone went silent. The judge, a man I'd never met, looked at me with disbelief and said, "Mrs. Brooks, why are you here?" I wanted to answer. I wanted to tell him that I was there because my son couldn't walk, because his wife had turned love into a weapon, and because silence had nearly destroyed us. But I didn't speak. I just looked at her, Jessica, my daughter-in-law, sitting there in her perfect dress, pretending to be the victim, the same woman who made my son believe he was worthless, the same woman who smiled while taking everything we built. That day, they expected a grieving mother. What they got was a lawyer who remembered who she was. And before that gavel hit the desk, I swore one thing: no one will destroy my family again. The silence of the funeral, the sound of rain mingled with the murmur of voices inside the church. It was as if the whole world had decided to mourn with me. The flowers, white and heavy with dew, exuded a perfume too sweet for such a bitter morning. People approached, one by one, repeating phrases that already sounded rehearsed. "He's in a better place. God knows what he's doing." But none of them could penetrate the veil of emptiness that covered me. Daniel, my son, lay there, quiet, motionless, inside that dark wooden coffin. And I, somehow, still hoped he would breathe. When it was all over, one of the funeral home assistants handed me his most frequently worn jacket, the same one I'd seen hanging on the back of his bedroom door since college. "You might want to keep it," she said. I did. It was a small, almost automatic gesture, but when I touched the fabric, I felt something hard in the inside pocket. My fingers recognized the shape of a notebook. A small, leather-bound journal, worn at the edges, with a blue ribbon marked between the pages. In the car, as the wind beat against the windows and the raindrops ran down like lazy tears, I opened it. His handwriting was the same as always, firm, slightly tilted to the right, as if the words wanted to rush out before the pain could reach them. On the first page, a short sentence stopped me in my tracks. "If you're reading this, Mom, it means she won." My heart raced. The rain outside became a distant sound. I flipped through the pages quickly, the yellowed paper creaking between my fingers. Each line felt like a whisper from beyond. It spoke of secrets, of guilt, of fear. And her name appeared again and again: Julia, the woman he loved, the daughter-in-law I once tried to embrace as a daughter. The woman who, I now understood, could have been the cause of it all. I slammed the diary shut. The car was parked outside my house, but I couldn't get out. The engine was off, the world was still, and I was there, trapped between the past and whatever that notebook was about to reveal to me. I knew that if I kept reading, I might never be able to look at life the same way again. That night was long. The living room clock read 2:17 a.m. when I finally found the courage to open the diary again. The words seemed to pulse, alive, as if Daniel were sitting before me, telling me everything I didn't want to see. He wrote about fear, blackmail, loneliness, and how love can become a prison. As I read, an old memory flashed through me, the day he first brought Julia home. Her smile was too wide, her hands too cold. "She's perfect, Mom," he said. I wanted to believe it. Back then, I still believed in promises made with eyes. I closed the diary for the third time as the sun began to rise. The living room curtains filtered the light in golden streaks, and for a moment, the world seemed lighter. But it was just an illusion. Deep down, I knew that little notebook would be the key to a labyrinth from which I might not emerge the same. I took a deep breath, hugged the diary to my chest, and whispered, "It's okay, my son. I'll see this through." And there, alone, I vowed that I would find out what really killed Daniel, and that the truth, no matter how cruel, would not be buried with him. Before it all falls down, before tragedy struck, our life was simple. I lived in a small house surrounded by lilacs, and Daniel would come over on Sundays for lunch. He had this habit of showing up with flowers, not always fresh, sometimes stolen from his own garden, and stories about work, about the students at the school where he taught literature. He was a kind man, with a calmness that seemed to have come from his father. It was on one of those Sunday afternoons that he brought her for the first time, Julia, tall, beautiful, with the kind of smile that seems to know the effect it has. "Mom, this is the woman of my life," he said, with a sparkle in his eyes I hadn't seen since I was a boy. I greeted her, offered her coffee, and she thanked me with a quick, appraising look, like someone measuring the size of the land before setting foot. The following months were filled with small joys. They married in a sunny garden, Daniel in a blue suit and she in a simple but elegant dress. I cried as if I were giving my heart along with the bouquet. When Lily, my granddaughter, was born, the mornings felt purposeful again. Julia would call sometimes, her sweet voice asking for advice on recipes or colic remedies. I believed we were building a family, but the sweetness began to sour over time. Daniel began to seem tired and quiet. "It's work, Mom," he would say. "She feels lonely. I've been distant." And I, like so many mothers, wanted to believe that love is renewed with patience. What I didn't know is that sometimes love dies quietly, without making a sound. I started noticing the signs too late. The way Julia interrupted conversations, her blunt responses, her eyes rolling when Daniel forgot something small. She began deciding everything: what to eat, where to go, who to visit. And he, always conciliatory, gave in. I saw in him a boy trying to earn affection. The distance between us grew. He started visiting less, always with vague excuses. "Julia's been feeling sensitive, we'd better not go this weekend." I didn't want to be the intrusive mother-in-law. So I kept quiet. Silence is the shield of those afraid of losing what little they have left, but the first real crack appeared one Christmas. Julia arrived late, wearing a red dress and heavy perfume. Daniel wore a faint smile. When I tried to hug him, she interrupted. "He has the flu, better not." And it was at that moment that I realized, the separation wasn't accidental. It was constructed. That night, as I was clearing away the dishes, Daniel looked at me with eyes that felt like he wanted to ask for help but couldn't. And I, cowardly, looked away. If I'd known how much that gesture would haunt me later, I would have held his hand and said, "You're not alone, my son." But time is a cruel teacher. It teaches after the lesson has already cost everything. Bonds and illusions, that phase of life seemed too perfect to be real. Daniel had gotten a promotion at school, Julia posted photos of herself smiling on her new balcony, and Lily was growing like a flower in the sun. I saw the images on social media: candlelit dinners, trips to the countryside, gifts exchanged on birthdays, and convinced myself that everything was fine. But the piece of photographs is the cruelest disguise in the world. They hide what doesn't fit in the frame. I remember one late afternoon when I unexpectedly visited them. Daniel was in the garden, trying to build a dollhouse for Lily. He was sweating, laughing at his own mistakes, and the little girl was laughing with that innocence life hadn't yet touched. Julia appeared at the window, watching. For a moment, I thought it was a look of tenderness, but there was something cold there, an impatience disguised as a smile. "You should have hired someone for that," she said as I got out of the car. Daniel responded with a light joke, trying to break the ice. She didn't laugh. She went inside and slammed the door hard enough to make Lily stop laughing. It was at that moment that I felt the first pang of worry, like a loose thread pulling at an entire fabric. During dinner, Julia remained distant, checking her phone between bites. Daniel tried to keep the conversation going, but she cut him off with short sentences. When I offered to help in the kitchen, she declined, smiling politely. "You've already done enough, leave it to me." But there was venom in the sweetness. That night, as I was putting on my coat to leave, I saw something I've never forgotten. Daniel approached her, gently touching her shoulder, and she recoiled as if avoiding a burn. "Good night, Mom," he said, forcing a smile. "Julia's just tired." I wanted to believe her, but something inside me whispered that her tiredness was selective. The following weeks were a parade of excuses. "We're busy, Lily has the flu, maybe another weekend." Julia began to mediate our conversations, always the one answering the phone, always the one saying what Daniel wanted to say. I spent my nights reviewing old photos, trying to figure out where we'd lost our way. One day, I received a message from Daniel. "Mom, can I visit you alone this week?" My heart warmed. I baked a cake and prepared his favorite tea. He arrived with a drawn face, dark circles under his eyes. We sat on the porch for almost an hour without saying anything. Until he whispered, "Sometimes I think I've become a burden." Before I could respond, his phone rang. It was her. He answered, his voice becoming low, guilty, obedient. Then he hung up and stood. "I have to go. She doesn't like it when I'm gone too much." I hugged him, and for a moment, I felt that same 10-year-old boy who begged me not to leave him alone in the dark. Only now the darkness had a different name, Julia. When the gate closed behind him, I realized something profound had changed. A mother's love is instinctive, but it's also intuitive. And in that moment, I knew my son's house, the one he had built with so much love, was no longer a home. It was a prison with flowery curtains. The first visible crack appeared one March morning when the phone rang. It was Daniel. His voice sounded distant, as if he were calling from another world. "Mom, can you transfer $2,000 to Julia's account? She had a problem with her card." "Sure, son," I replied, trying not to sound surprised. He'd always been responsible and organized. But in that moment, I sensed hesitation. "Is everything okay between you two?" I asked. A brief silence. "Yes, just a hiccup." The call ended too quickly, as if he wanted to avoid answering. The following week, Julia posted photos at a resort. Massages, glasses of wine, a cinematic sunset. The caption read, "Learning to love myself again." I stared at my phone screen for minutes, my heart racing. My bank account was emptying, and she was confessing to the mirror. Something was wrong. When Daniel came to visit, I tried to broach the subject. "She needed rest, Mom," he said, looking away. "It's been hard for her too." That sentence echoed in my head. Hard for her? Hard for someone who manipulated others until the sparkle faded from their eyes? Time passed, and the requests for financial help became more frequent. Repairs, overdue bills, supposed emergencies. When I suggested talking to Julia directly, he became irritated. "Don't do that. It'll get worse." That's when I realized, fear had already set in. One day, while delivering mail that had arrived at my house by mistake, I saw Daniel sitting on the porch. He was trying to call someone, but the line kept dropping. When I approached, he hid his phone. "It was just the bank," he said. But his eyes betrayed something else, shame. That night, I couldn't sleep. I walked around the house, repeating her name silently, as if the sound might reveal some hidden truth. Julia. 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 Why was every instinct in me screaming that something was wrong? But no one seemed to hear. I decided to call him the next morning. Julia answered. "Hi, mother-in-law. Daniel's sleeping. He needs his rest, you know. He's been working too much." Her voice was sweet but sharp, like a blade wrapped in velvet. Before I could respond, she hung up. I stood there with the phone in my hand, feeling the weight of foreboding. The kind of silence that precedes a tragedy. And I thought, when love needs to be explained, It's no longer love, it's control. The lie revealed. I still remember the exact night I found out. I was helping Daniel with some paperwork for work when I realized he'd left his laptop open. It was late, and he was asleep on the couch, exhausted. I was just about to close the lid when a notification appeared in the corner of the screen. New message from Mark. The name meant nothing to me. Out of curiosity, or perhaps instinct, I opened it. The first few lines were enough to chill my blood. You promised it would be quick, one message read. He won't last long. And when it's all over, we'll be free. Julia's response came seconds later. Calm down. He trusts me. After this, no one will stop us. The words danced across the screen like liquid poison. I read and reread, hoping it was some kind of misunderstanding, an old conversation, a misplaced joke. But the more I read, the clearer it became. They were together. Julia and that man, Mark, were plotting something beyond betrayal. It was cruelty. It was calculation. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely breathe. For a moment, I considered deleting the messages, pretending I'd never seen them. But my mother's instincts took over. I took photos of the screen, every detail, every date. Then I closed the laptop, put a blanket over Daniel, and climbed the stairs like someone carrying a forbidden secret. The next day, I tried to hide it. I made coffee, chatted about the weather, about work. Julia seemed normal, too relaxed, even. She smiled, kissed her husband on the forehead, and left, saying she was going to the gym. I stood there, watching that woman leave the house as if nothing existed beyond the mirror. During lunch, I decided to tell Daniel. I sat across from him, looked straight at him, and said, "Son, I need to show you something." He frowned curiously. When I opened the photos on my phone, his expression changed. His eyes trembled, his lips parted soundlessly. "That's old," he tried to justify. "It must be a joke." "Are you kidding, Daniel? She plans to get rid of you." He stood up, nervous, and asked me to stop. "You don't understand, Mom. She's been through a lot. She's fragile." It was then that I realized, his love had turned into fear disguised as loyalty. When Julia returned that night, she acted as if nothing had happened. She hugged him from behind, whispered something in his ear, and he smiled, a sad, broken smile. I knew I'd lost the battle at that moment, but not war. I kept the evidence, all of it. And I began to observe silently, waiting for the right moment to act. A mother's love can be sweet, but it also knows how to wait. The night everything broke, it was raining heavily that Saturday. The roar of the storm drowned out every other sound, and the sky seemed to reflect what I felt inside, unease. I was at home, reading a book, when the phone rang. It was a call from the police. "Mrs. Brooks?" said the voice on the other end. "Your son was in an accident." Time stood still. Everything inside me fell apart in seconds. I rushed to the hospital without thinking, without feeling my body. I remember the sound of rain hitting the car windows, the smell of wet asphalt, the flashing red lights reflecting off the windows. When I arrived, a doctor was waiting for me in the hallway. "He's alive," he said, "but the impact was severe. There's spinal damage." I walked into the room and saw my son motionless, with tubes, monitors, and bandages. His breathing was a distant, mechanical sound. I held his hand and cried without saying a word. Julia sat there, her face streaked with tears. But there was something strange about that crying. It seemed rehearsed, empty. In the following days, she became a constant presence. Flowers, promises, vows of eternal love. Everyone praised her strength, her devotion. Only I noticed the cracks. She was never alone with him for long. She always treated him with a caress that didn't touch her eyes. And when she thought no one was looking, she would slip out into the hallway to answer calls. 3 weeks later, Daniel was discharged. Julia insisted they could handle everything themselves, but I could see the fear in his eyes. "Stay with me, Mom," he whispered. "Of course, my love. I'm not going anywhere." In the days that followed, the house became a field of tension. I cared for him, fed him, helped him sleep. Julia arrived late, impatient. "You're overreacting, Eleanor. He needs to learn to fend for himself. He almost died." I replied. She shrugged, emotionless. One night, I woke to noises in the kitchen. I slowly went downstairs. Julia was talking on the phone. "Yes, I know. He's still alive, but not for long. Once I get the signature, everything will be ours." My blood ran cold. My legs felt weak. I quietly went upstairs and locked the bedroom door. I stood there, listening to the distant sound of her voice, repeating plans that now seemed like echoes from hell. The next morning, she acted normally, made coffee, kissed Daniel on the forehead. He didn't notice anything. I noticed everything, and for the first time in months, I looked at her without fear. Because in that moment, I understood. What she had done to my son wasn't just betrayal. It was destruction, and if fate had given me the pain of loss, I would use that pain as a weapon. That day, in front of the mirror, I promised myself, she will not win. The silent betrayal, time seemed to stand still inside that house. The clock ticked, but the sound of its hands was the only sign that the world still turned. Daniel slept most of the day, drugged by medication. Julia, increasingly distant, lived between phone calls and urgent commitments. I watched in silence, my heart heavy, like a sentinel on vigil. It was one of those afternoons that something caught my attention. Julia left in a hurry, leaving her phone charging in the kitchen. I hadn't meant to touch it, but a notification flashed on the screen. The name Mark again. The message was short. "Did he sign?" Her response appeared seconds later. "Almost. Mom is always around." My stomach churned. I sat at the table and closed my eyes, trying to process it. It was all true. She planned to use Daniel, weakened, to take control of something. The money, the house, maybe even custody of Lily. I stood, my entire body shaking, and for the first time in months, I felt something besides pain, anger. When she returned, I tried to hide it, but my voice cracked. "You're early," I commented, forcing a smile. She looked at me as if she'd noticed the crack. I had to cancel an appointment. There was something new in the way he looked at me, a shadow of distrust. That night was long. I lay awake, listening to the sounds of the house, the hum of the heater, the rain pattering against the windows. Daniel's faint sigh as he slept. Each sound seemed a reminder that time was running out. The next morning, I received an anonymous message. "You don't know me, but I met Daniel. He told me about his fear. Be careful with her." The number was unknown. The words were short but precise. I trembled. Who was that person? What did they know? I put my phone away, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. Over coffee, Julia was trying to talk about selling a property we'd never mentioned. "Daniel doesn't need so much space anymore. We can simplify things." The way she said "we can" sounded like a sentence. I smiled, gulped down my coffee, and calmly replied, "Nothing will be sold without my signature." Her expression changed for a second. A flash of fury crossed her face, but then the smile returned. "Of course, Eleanor. I just thought I'd help." At that moment, I realized the game had truly begun. And for the first time in a long time, I was ready to play. The diary, the accident had left Daniel more fragile, but also more silent. Our conversations became monosyllables. Sometimes he'd look at me as if he wanted to say something but couldn't bring himself to. I waited. The silence between mother and son is different. He speaks, even without words. It was one gray morning that everything began to change. Julia left in a hurry, saying she needed to take care of some pending paperwork. As soon as her car disappeared around the corner, Daniel called me over with a tense look. "Mom, there's something you need to see." He asked me to open the dresser drawer. Inside, I found a black-covered notebook, the same one I would later discover was the diary he left me. "If anything happens to me," he said, "you will know what to do." His hands were shaking. Mine too. I wanted to ask, but he just looked away, as if afraid the walls would overhear him. "She's not who she says she is," he murmured. "There are things you can't imagine." That afternoon, when he fell asleep, I sat in the armchair in my room and began reading. The first few pages were simple, notes about work, small details of my daily routine. But soon the tone changed. "She changed," he wrote. "After the accident, something inside her went dark. She blames me for everything, for surviving, for no longer being able to be the man she wanted to show the world." Every page was an open wound. He described humiliations, insults, subtle manipulations. "Sometimes I think she wants me to give up, to disappear." Further on, a line that took my breath away. "Yesterday she spoke to Mark. She said everything was almost ready. That after that, I would finally rest." Tears blinded me. I closed the diary and hugged it to my chest. Each word was a blade, but also proof. The pain I felt at that moment wasn't just that of a mother, it was that of a woman, of a human being. It was then that I heard the sound of her car returning. I quickly hid the diary, disguising my breathing. Julia walked in smiling, carrying bags. "I bought some things for home," she said. I looked at her and, for the first time, I didn't see a daughter-in-law. I saw the enemy. As she walked upstairs, I let the tears flow. The truth was there, in my hands. And I knew that if he couldn't break free, I would do it for him, even if it cost everything. The decision, the next day, I woke before sunrise. The house was silent, and that silence weighed more heavily than any noise. I stood in the kitchen, watching the kettle boil, the steam rising slowly, like an omen. Sometimes the moment to act arrives disguised as routine, a cup of coffee, a silence, a memory. And it was there, between one bitter sip and the next, that I decided, no more waiting. I spent the morning rereading Daniel's diary, word for word. Each line was a cry for help disguised as a confession. "She makes me believe I'm a burden," one passage read. "But sometimes I think she's the burden." I felt a pang in my chest. As a mother, I taught him to forgive. As a woman, I realized that forgiveness is sometimes a prison. I decided to act, but carefully. Julia was smart, calculating. If I showed my hand too soon, she would destroy the evidence. So I began collecting what I could: copies of emails, transfer receipts, voice recordings. Every detail mattered. For years, I had been a lawyer. Now, I would be the judge of my own story. That afternoon, I sat down with Daniel and spoke bluntly. "Son, I know everything." He didn't answer. The tears began to fall before he could speak. "I didn't want to worry you, Mom. I just wanted her to love me." His pain cut something deep inside me. I touched his hand and said, "You are still loved, and now it's my turn to fight for you." The next day, I walked into the office of an old colleague, Attorney Richard Hale. He recognized me immediately. "Eleanor Brooks, the Queen of Law. Long time no see." I smiled reluctantly. I need your help, Richard. But above all, I need discretion. I told him everything. I showed him the diary, the messages, the evidence. Richard was silent for a long time, running his fingers over his chin. This is serious, Ellie. But do you know what you're doing? I know, I replied. I'm saving what's left of my family. Over the next few days, I devised a plan. Every move would be calculated. Julia believed she had everything under control, but she underestimated the woman watching her silently. I started recording conversations, secretly recording audio. And the more I listened, the more I understood. She was already preparing to disappear with the money and Lily. One night, while Daniel was sleeping, I found a partially packed suitcase in her closet. Her passport, fake documents, and a ticket to Miami, the final confirmation. I went upstairs, sat next to Daniel, and whispered, "Tomorrow, son. Tomorrow it all begins." He looked at me confused, but there was a spark in his eyes, something I hadn't seen in a long time. Hope, the plan, the preparation took days. Every detail was crucial. Richard helped me draft a petition, and together we gathered enough evidence to file a lawsuit for attempted fraud and abuse. But I knew legal justice would take time, and Julia was quick. So I devised another plan, a moral one. On Friday night, I hosted a dinner party. I invited Julia, Daniel, and some close neighbors, people who had always admired her. The table was immaculate, the candles lit, and the expensive wine she loved. She arrived wearing a red dress, with that smile of a woman who believes she's won the game. What a surprise, Eleanor. Did you decide to celebrate something? Yes, I replied. The end of lies. She laughed, thinking it was just irony. But while we served dinner, I left my phone recording silently on the sideboard. Daniel watched silently, his gaze steady, during the meal. I guided the conversation carefully, like someone setting an invisible trap. I asked about bills, investments, travel. Julia talked too much when she felt in control. And she talked, oh, how she talked. Of course I took care of the family finances. Daniel never had the head for it. Oh, and that money you transferred to Mark's account? She froze. For a second, her face lost its color. What are you talking about? What everyone is hearing. The silence at the table was absolute. She stood up, furious. Are you accusing me, old woman? I stood up too, calmly. I'm not accusing you, Julia. I'm exposing you. I grabbed my phone, stopped the recording, and showed it to her. This will go to the police tomorrow. Daniel tried to get up, but she pushed him back into the chair. You ruined everything. She yelled. No, I replied. You did it yourself. She stormed out of the house, knocking down everything in her path. Daniel began to cry. She'll come back, Mom. She always comes back. Not this time, son. That night, I sat on the porch and watched the sky. The clouds parted, revealing the first stars. For the first time in years, the air felt clear, but deep down, I knew what happened in that house wouldn't end there. Julia was a woman who refused to accept loss. And I would still have to face her one last time. The confrontation, the hearing was scheduled for an overcast Tuesday, the kind of day that seems tailor-made for trials. I arrived early, the sound of my heels echoing through the empty courtroom hallway. Each step was a reminder of the path that had brought me here, from the silent woman who endured humiliation to the mother who was now marching toward the truth. Daniel stood beside me, pale but serene. His wheelchair squeaked as it rolled across the shiny floor. You don't have to do this, Mom, he whispered. I squeezed his hand. Yes, I do. For you. For her. When the door opened, Julia walked in. Dressed in black, her hair tied in a perfect bun, she looked like an elegant widow, an actress in her prime. But her gaze betrayed fear. Across the room, the judge, a middle-aged man with a weary expression, watched us carefully. "Mrs. Brooks, are you prepared to proceed?" "I am, Your Honor." The first few hours were cold and bureaucratic. Lawyers exchanged words, documents were presented. But as the evidence poured in, Julia's mask began to crack. The messages, the audio recordings, Daniel's diary, each piece of evidence was a blow. "This is absurd," she shouted at one point, rising from her chair. "She faked this whole thing. She's stalking me." The judge raised an eyebrow. "Do you have proof of that, Ms. Miller?" Her silence was the answer. Then it was my turn to speak. I stood up, looked directly at her, and said in a firm voice, "For years, I kept quiet. I thought protecting my family meant staying silent. But silence is the greatest accomplice to cruelty. And today, I break mine." The entire room fell silent. Julia looked away for the first time. I continued. "She tried to take advantage of a sick man, destroy what we built, and use love as currency. But true love cannot be sold, and it cannot be deceived." When the judge announced that Lily would go to Daniel, and that Julia would be charged with attempted fraud, my legs felt weak. Daniel cried beside me, but I didn't cry. I just closed my eyes and took a deep breath. Justice doesn't shout. It whispers. Akeda, the news spread quickly. In less than a week, Julia disappeared. She left behind an empty bank account and a rented house with boarded-up windows. The silence she left behind was almost comfortable. But what remained inside us was deeper, scars. Daniel began to improve. Physical therapy, conversations, small daily victories. Sometimes I'd find him in the garden, pushing his chair alone, with Lily on his lap. He smiled in a new way, light, but marked by what he'd been through. One day he said to me, "Mom, if it weren't for you, I wouldn't be here anymore." And I replied, "If it weren't for you, I wouldn't have any reason to continue." Even so, there were nights when the past would come flooding back. Dreams where I'd see Julia smiling, that smile of someone who thinks they always win. I'd wake up sweating, but soon remember, the game was over, until an envelope arrived in the mail. No return address. Inside, just a photo, Julia and Mark, somewhere sunny, probably abroad. On the back, a handwritten sentence, "You win, Eleanor. But the game isn't over yet." I put the photo away in a drawer. Not out of fear, but because I learned that not every battle needs to be fought twice. That night, I sat on the porch, watching the sunset. The sky was the same color as the day of the accident, a shade between gold and morning, and I realized that sometimes winning isn't about destroying the enemy. It is to survive it. When Daniel left to call me for dinner, Lily ran up to me, laughing. I picked her up, and she asked, "Grandma, is Bad Mommy coming back?" I looked at her and smiled tenderly. "No, dear. Evil, once lost, never returns. It only changes its name." That night ended in silence, but not the same as before. It was a clean silence, full of peace, and for the first time, I felt like I could sleep without fear. Redemption. The following weeks were like a slow dawn after a storm. With each day, the house seemed more alive. The flowers that had previously wilted on the porch began to bloom again, as if they, too, had decided to begin anew. I spent my mornings tending the garden, and for the first time in years, the sound that woke me wasn't worry, but Lily's laughter playing with Daniel. Watching my son rise again was a silent miracle. With each small step forward, the first unsupported step, the first pain-free day, I felt something inside me heal as well. It was as if life was telling me, you did what needed to be done, but the guilt still lingered. Some days, I wondered if I could have done things differently. If I had spoken up sooner, acted sooner. Maybe Daniel wouldn't have suffered so much. But Richard once reminded me, Eleanor, sometimes justice comes late, but it's still justice. Those words stayed with me. One afternoon, while cleaning the office, I found Daniel's journal again. I read the last few pages, and there was something new. Pain changes shape when someone shares it. And my mother taught me that. I closed the notebook with tears in my eyes. Redemption didn't come with apologies, nor with forgiveness. It came with recognition. I began helping out at a local community center, offering free legal counsel to women experiencing emotional abuse. Each story reminded me a little of my own. Each look made me realize my suffering was not in vain. I was turning pain into purpose, and at night, when silence returned, there was no more fear in him, just gratitude, justice. The case against Julia dragged on for months. Even abroad, she couldn't escape everything. The evidence we gathered was solid: fake accounts, embezzlement, psychological manipulation. I got a call from Richard one morning. The judge handed down the sentence, Ellie. She's lost everything. Accounts frozen, properties seized. She'll have to answer to the courts when she returns. I didn't celebrate. I didn't scream. I just sat and breathed. Justice doesn't taste like victory, it tastes like peace. That night, I prepared a simple dinner. Daniel, Lily, and I, red wine, homemade bread, and the old radio playing jazz. Lily's laughter filled the air. I thought of all we had lost, and all we had now, freedom. A few days later, I was invited to give a lecture at the law school where I had studied decades ago. The topic was ethics and family justice. When I walked on stage, I looked at the young students and said, "You will learn about laws, articles, sentences. But what they don't teach you in books is that justice is also courage. And courage is the first article of the soul." The audience fell silent. I didn't need applause. I just wish a woman among those ranks would walk out of there knowing she could fight. I returned home at dusk. Daniel was waiting with coffee and the smile I loved most. "So, how was the lecture, Queen of Law?" I smiled. I think I finally figured out what that title means. Epilogue. Months later, we were all on the beach, the same place where, years ago, Daniel and Julia had made promises that time had destroyed. Now, the sea seemed calmer, almost complicit. Lily ran across the sand, and Daniel, already standing, followed her, laughing. I watched the two of them, the wind playing with my hair, and my heart felt light. I opened my purse and pulled out a yellowed envelope. Inside was the last letter Julia sent me before she was officially charged. "One day, you'll understand that love is imperfect, too," I read in silence. "Then let the wind carry the paper away. Not everything needs to be answered. Some stories just need to end." As the sun set, Lily came running back and grabbed my hand. "Grandma, what is truth?" I thought before answering. "The truth, my dear, is what remains standing after all the lies fall." We stood there, hands clasped, watching the sea swallow the horizon, and in that moment, I realized there was finally peace, not just outside of me, but inside as well. When we got back home, I took one last look in the hallway mirror. The woman reflected there was no longer the one who suffered in silence. She was the one who survived, the one who fought, the one who learned that love and justice, sometimes, live in the same wound. I turned off the lights, closed the door and whispered to myself, because the truth never dies. It only waits.